start now, before my talk, just a word for Dr. Levine to say something about as distinguished lecturer, not me.
Dr. Marion asked me before we start with grand rounds to recognize and honor one of our probably longest term faculty members, certainly in the room except for Dr. Muslow, I expect. Dr. Paul Winder, who many of you may have noticed has diligently been sitting in the back of the room attending grand rounds for many years now. Paul, do you want to come forward?
I understand.
Okay. He's recently retired. He had been a member of the part-time faculty for many years and full-time faculty before then. And we want to recognize him for all his years of service. He graduated from both Tulane undergraduate and Tulane Medical School, did his dermatology training at the University of Michigan, and then returned to Shreveport. And in 1967, he was appointed clinical instructor in dermatology and syphilology. Now, I don't know that anyone in this room is old enough to remember except Dr. Winder, myself, and Dr. Muslow when dermatology and syphilology were one specialty. I remember as a student in Bellevue, the dermatology and Dr. Fowler, syphilology clinic. I think that was usurped by infectious disease, and I've not heard one complaint from dermatology since then. He went on to become clinical professor of medicine. He was the chairman of dermatology here for many years, instructing many residents, many students, and was instrumental in the earlier years in this medical school. He was president of the medical staff here, president of the Louisiana Dermatology Society, president of the faculty of LSU, and the Shreveport Medical Society. He's a fellow of the American College of Dermatology, and again had remained active on the part-time faculty for many years, but finally took the great step and fully retired just recently. While I was sitting here with Dr. Muslow, Dr. Muslow pointed out, Dr. Winder has quite a number of publications, one of which in 1967 was the first description of a woman with Fabry's disease diagnosed in this institution. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, Dr. Winder, thank you so much for all your service over these many years.
I'd just like to say probably the thing I appreciated most in all those years was working with Dr. Muslow.
Thank you, Dr. Levine, for recognizing that. And thanks, Dr. J. Marion, for giving me the opportunity of giving this special grand rounds. We usually speak about science, but this time I'm going to speak about a science maker. I hope that this will be inspiring to us, teaching us something more even than science. I appreciate your coming, knowing that this is not for the board exam. Always we go for where things can give us answers to questions to pass an exam with. And I appreciate in particular Dr. Muslow, who is the Chancellor for Life Emeritus. Thank you, Dr. Muslow, for coming from another institution while you are busy still, and you are a role model for many of us. So the objective is learning from the life of a legendary scientist, fostering role models in academic medicine, and putting scientific integrity above personal gain. The person that I'm talking about obtained a PhD and MD together in the same year at the age of 25 from the University of Minnesota. He went to the pediatric residency there, then went for immunology fellowship at the Rockefeller Institute, and back to Minnesota to be an instructor, and within 1 year became assistant professor Within 2 years, associate professor. Within 1 year, professor of pediatric microbiology and pathology. And in 1970, at a young age, chairman of pathology at the University of Minnesota. And at one time, he was the chairman of 2 departments, pediatrics and pathology. 1973, went to the Great Institute Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, and on the faculty of Cornell University. And after about 10 years, he moved for a brief time to the University of Oklahoma, but did not last long. And we were fortunate when he went to the University of South Florida, where I got the pleasure to go there later on, and where he became a professor in several departments, distinguished research professor of the university. He was the head of the Allergy, Immunology, Rheumatology, and Bone Marrow Transplantation section, a large service, and director of the Allergy and Immunology and Diagnostic Laboratory Immunology Fellowship Program that was present for some years. Just selected major achievements for this man, describing several of the primary immune deficiency disorders, being originally as a pediatrician. He discovered the role of the thymus very early in 1950s and described a disease in an adult where there is thymoma with immunodeficiency that was named after him by his colleagues. He did a lot of work on transplantation immunology, and he performed the first successful bone marrow transplant in the world, founded the National Bone Marrow Registry in conjunction with Florida Congressman Bill Young, who had a child in his family that had leukemia, and Dr. Good, sorry I mentioned the name, I didn't mean to mention the name now, told him the cure for this child is to do bone marrow transplant, and they initiated the National Registry. Continued work on nutrition and immunity and immunology of aging, and very interesting to know that how he started with childhood immune deficiency disease to go up to the immunology of aging. I think that's a tendency of the career. He published more than 2,000 papers and chapters, and when I say papers, these are real papers, not the papers that like I do with the fellows. No, there's something much better. Authored or edited more than 50 books, got 13 honorary doctorate degrees from the best universities, had more than 100 national and international awards, had multiple lifetime achievements awards, and trained more than 300 physician scientists of the good kind, most of whom became leaders, not just in the United States, but in other countries. That's the man that I will talk about today. 1967 was a good year, not just for Dr. Good, that he performed the first successful bone marrow transplant, but the first heart transplant in the world was done the same year. The IgE, the immunoglobulin mediates allergy in the same year, and the beta-adrenergic theory in atopic asthma was discovered in the same year also. Very interesting in this slide is loaded, but in 1 minute. Anderson Tivani was the dean of the medical school at UCF, University of South Florida. And he persuaded Dr. Good to come to the University of South Florida. Another interesting thing here, the IgE discovery, Kimishiga and Teruko Shizaka at the University of Colorado was looking for patients with asthma, what is peculiar in their serum. And the heart transplant guy died from asthma while he was vacationing in Cyprus. And the beta-adrenergic theory was in atopic asthma. So there's a lot of connection there, as if the stars out there connecting these wonderful people in a certain way. My initial encounter with Robert Good, and I will be very brief on that so that I don't be seen as if I am putting myself up there, but I couldn't help it. I minimized tremendously the things that I shared with Dr. Good. It was in 1976, while I was a fellow at UCLA, my mentor, while we were attending the Society of Pediatric Research, I remembered very well that it was in the Hilton Hotel in San Francisco. My mentor told me, don't miss Dr. Good's lecture. I went slightly before time, and I found that the large room was packed and people were standing against the walls. I didn't understand more than 90% of what this man said, because it was much higher than my level. But I came out very impressed by that person. That's a real scientist and a real teacher. Even I could not get what he's saying. Next time, it was in a much closer occasion. It was a closed workshop in Lausanne, Switzerland, and it was for about 25 people. And I was very surprised. Another friend from the NIH was with me, and we were the youngest in the group, and said, what are we doing here among these giants? There were giants from various countries in a workshop, and we felt to have to be standing against the wall away from that great people there. This opportunity made us know each other more, and it was a great joy that the giants remembered our faces. In 1991, Dr. Good kindly invited me for a lecture, and I was just elated. Who am I to be invited to that place to give a lecture? He took me after the lecture to his office and said, we would like that you join us. I said, me? Who am I to add to that great team of yours? He said, our service appears as if it is immunology, although we do very well in allergy and asthma and other things. So if you can come and put that part of the specialty high up. I said, wow, I will try. And that. So it was a great time. For how long, Dr. Good, you will be working? He said, I'm 70, and I will work for 5 more years. I said, that's good enough for me. Because whenever I heard a lecture by that man, I would just gain a lot. So to work with him for 5 years, that's wonderful. I said, I'll come for 5 years. However, he did not retire. And I stayed with him for 9 years until his esophageal cancer became very advanced. I learned a lot from Dr. Good, amazingly more than immunology. We always look at those giants as if they are very high there in clouds and we are down on earth. But we come close to them and the real scientists will find many of them down to earth, are not as we thought. He emphasized learning from patients. A person who publishes sophisticated lab work and do experiments. He was an excellent clinician. He was called by many around in the institution there. He's a walking library. Whenever there is a diagnostic problem, say consult Dr. Good. And he told us also, learn from the patient, not from the books. The books are written from the patient. The patient does not get sick according to the book. Always mention the word, the experiments of nature. Learn from them. He valued teaching, including one-on-one. I encountered some of his trainees who came from Japan or other countries that they did not know much of the English language. He stayed with them one-on-one basis. I admired his patience on that. And they come out great scientists and great contributors to their own countries there. When the man published all that, casually mentioned a sentence that I jotted quickly. I wrote it and I framed it in my office. You publish a paper, only a few people see it, a fewer people read it, much fewer remember it, and in a few years, you yourself will forget it. You teach something, it propagates and multiplies. This is a very profound statement, which is very, very true, and affected me markedly. My memories with him were remarkable, but I will minimize that. But before I left, when I knew that we were jumping out of the ship, he was an institution, not the walls of the university or the medical school. So I was allowed, with his permission, to take from his wife and his secretary some mementos for myself where I'm leaving. I copied some documents, particularly pictures, that I enjoyed, prepared presentations in groups, to groups that they knew him. And the last one was last year in an international meeting in New York City. The program chair put a memorial lecture in the name of Dr. Good, and I was privileged to do that. One of the audience was an editor of a journal, so he told me, can you write this up? And it was written and was published earlier this year. What's the life of this great man after we heard what he accomplished? He was born in a very small village, Crosby, Minnesota. At that time was very small number. If you look now about the number, it's a few thousands in that place. Second of 4 sons, the father was principal of a school and the mother was a teacher. At 5 years, unfortunately, he watched his father die of cancer, an event that might have influenced his career choice. While a teenager, unfortunately, he developed a polio-like illness that affected his walking for life. He stayed on a wheelchair for some time during his childhood, but continued limping. During the high school, he had a morning newspaper route and saved his earning for college expenses. This is a picture when he was a baby, and I looked at this with admiration. Does this look predict the future of that baby? Well, I have other pictures of historic people that I found, it looks like this guy, I'm from Egypt, and they're doing the same thing. And who is this guy? He became the great pharaoh, Ramses II. Whoa. Well, so that sign, if you have any child you find putting his index finger at his lip, cheer up. The young boy, he was always reading. That's his favorite companion. At the high school, the newspaper wrote about him that he is destined for success, going to college. And this is a handwritten note by his mother. I will try to read it. He comes home whistling or singing. Books are forever with him. He says he has no hobby, and yet he will deny himself food, clothing, and entertainment to get the education he desires. 20 years old, finished 3 years pre-med at the University of Minnesota, senior in the college of whatever SLA 942. Well, that is his expression of love to medicine, and graduated with 2 degrees at the age of 25. And he joined the faculty at the University of Minnesota. And doctors at that time, they wore white coats. His favorite place was the lab. People learned from him. And this is the same man. He's very unconventional. Just can dress in any way he likes, the full spectrum. And he put the slides on the floor and organized his lecture. He moved to the great place of the Sloan Kettering Institute of Cancer, where he has more than or close to 4,000 employees, more than 200 scientists as physicians or PhD researchers. And here is at work. You can look at his face. It can't be that he just came from work, from home. And the clock shows that it is 12:55. But is it PM or AM? I assume it is AM. People who worked with him at Sloan Kettering, some of them, they tell me, oh, he was grueling us. He will come start at 5 o'clock in the morning for appointments, and we'll work just endless hours. But that is the chef at work. From a science writer, Ralph Moss, I found this part. His day began well before sunrise. Friends, colleagues, and employees are expected to accommodate to his grueling schedule. I would travel the subway in the pre-dawn darkness to attend the early morning meeting in his office. He thought nothing of keeping people waiting hours to see him. I took this personally until the day I saw James Watson cooling his heels in Good's outer office. The man gained a great respect and love by all means. And this shows that one day, a description of one day of his, he is a dynamite all over. He was in the cover magazine, and early when he joined the Sloan Kettering, and he focused on 2 areas of research: the immunology of cancer, how to control cancer immunologically, and now this is a very advanced area, and the transplantation area. It is very unfortunate incidents early in his tenure at the Sloan Kettering. In a study about transplantation between genetically unrelated mice, one of his researchers, he fabricated. And I'm putting his name and his picture because it's a public thing. I'm not revealing anything. It was about transplanting from the black mouse to the white mouse, and the researcher showed mice, white mice, with a patch of black skin. And it was great news that the protocol succeeded. But a technician was very early in the animal facility there, and she saw that he's using a black marker. He's making the incision, not removing anything from the white mouse, stitching it in its place, and painting that patch. But this technician, unfortunately, did not disclose it until after the study was released. It was a great breakthrough. I wish that she mentioned it before. Many times, people are nice to a dangerous degree, or it is not my business. I have nothing to do with it. We let things go, and that's not good. By the way, I care to protect the identity of the mouse, but not of the researcher. Before that incident, Dr. Good was destined for Nobel Prize for all his work before that incident. And he was nominated. But this incident came and cost Dr. Good the Nobel Prize. Ralph Moss, a science writer, had something on YouTube. I will share it with you.
Dr. Good, who was the president of the Institute, and I actually were discussing writing a book together. So we had dinner together. We went out socially. Here I was at 31, at the bottom of it, really, of the totem pole, and I was befriended by and friendly with the top person in the Institute. Very heady stuff for a young science writer. Bob Good was the most, I think to this day, the most published biologist in the world ever. I think 1,200 papers. Around the time that I was hired, he had this terrible thing happen. One of his young associates, William Summerlin, had claimed that he could transplant tissue, skin, from one unrelated mouse to another unrelated mouse, and he proved this by allegedly taking skin from a black mouse, soaking it in some special solution, transplanting it onto a white mouse and making it stick. And they demonstrated these mice all over the world. A technician at Sloan Kettering noticed as they were going up to make one of these presentations, he was carrying the cages with the mice, and he thought, those transplants look like they're in a slightly different place than they had been yesterday. And he went back to the lab and took some alcohol, rubbed on the transplants, and off they came. There was the white mouse underneath.
A renowned research hospital, the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, said today one of its scientists has admitted he put out phony research results. He's Dr. William Summerlin, 35, an expert in immunology. The review committee said Summerlin painted dark patches on the skin of 2 white mice, so it appeared he had successfully transplanted skin between animals genetically incompatible.
And this Summerlin had the audacity to actually paint these black splotches onto these white mice with a magic marker. I mean, talk about nerd, you know. And here, Good had co-authored these papers. Good had promoted him, literally promoted him to be a full member of the Institute, which is like full professor. And the whole thing blew up in his face. I mean, of all ironies of ironies, I walked in on this very flawed, very crisis-ridden institution. The day that I found out I was going to get the job, I was riding home. I lived in Brooklyn, and I was riding home on the subway, and I glanced over the shoulder of one of the other strap hangers on the subway, and I see Mouse Scandal rocks Sloan Kettering, and I go, oh no, you know, my luck. I just hired on, you know, as the third mate on the Titanic. That's how things started for me, and kind of went downhill from there.
My first job after my fellowship was at LSU New Orleans in the section of Allergy, Immunology. And as a new person in town, I was trying to introduce myself to other allergists in the area. I got an invitation to speak in Homa General Hospital. So I discovered that there's an allergist in my way to Homa. So I called and said, I'd like to introduce myself to you, and I waited before I went to the hospital. And when that allergist took me to his office, I noticed the large certificates and the name clicked. Oh my God, with whom I am here. I didn't notice it before. And I made the visit very short. It was that researcher who ran from the big institution and all the researchers at associate professor to go to work in a hidden place. And he never showed up in any meeting of our state society, regional society, or a national society. I never saw him after that visit in any meeting, disappeared. Dr. Good, after a brief 2 years in Oklahoma, was recruited by Dr. Santivani to the University of South Florida. and attached to it all children's hospital as its department of pediatrics. Shortly, within 1 month or so, joining Dr. Good, a classmate and a roommate was Dr. Sheldon Siegel, whom I knew from UCLA when I was a fellow. He sent to congratulate me a note and to warn me. He said, don't, however, try to put in the kind of hours that he puts in, or you will begin to fall apart at the seams. I think I've been falling apart at the seams without doing anything. This is a great man that achieved and inspired people to be giants. And it's frequently a misfortune to have very brilliant men in charge of affairs. They expect too much of ordinary men, and they measured up to that. During a meeting in Brazil, one of the speakers from the United States came to me in a reception and said, may you tell Dr. Good your barber says hello. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, when I was a faculty in Minnesota with Dr. Good, to guarantee some time, I offered him that I will cut his hair once a month. So I come to his office. He is under my control, listening. I take my time in cutting his hair, and I tell him what I am doing, and I hear his comments about my research. What will I do? What will I do? I didn't believe that much. So when I went back from Brazil, I told Dr. Good, and his wife was standing and said, your barber say hello to you. And then I said, the speaker said, oh yes, that's true. He was doing that with me. Look at that person is a chairman of the Department of Pathology. Now, this is how scientists are made. I don't want to comment on the stage that we reached, but probably Dr. Maslow, who has a great history in medicine, can comment later. That man has amazing combination. He received the highest honors and awards and has associated professionally and socially with the greatest of the world dignitaries, whether scientists or politicians. He cherished the memories of making voluntary house calls to underprivileged patients during his early years in Minnesota. He will go home because the patient is sick. He could not bring the child. Had hidden charities. One time, in the middle of the day, I was walking from the clinic towards my academic office, but I saw his car was parked in the street near the clinic. So I just casually asked the secretary, said, what was Dr. Good doing there? And see, his car was parked in the street. He said, no, he was not parking. He was waiting for his wife, who was working in the lab, to come down. They go once a year to distribute food to poor people. Hidden charities of that great man. He was leading, sharing, and serving. He insisted to take with us the responsibilities of rotations in the ward and in the clinics. Many times I tell him, we are large number, enough, you don't have to take on calls or the wards, and we will tell you. He insisted to be like any one of us. In one time, I found his secretary is canceling his trip to a national meeting because he discovered that all the faculty on their own booked going for the meeting. Some had presentations, some don't. I tried hard with him that I will be the one who canceled my trip. He insisted it's done. It is done, already canceled. And he stayed behind to be the only faculty. And we are all out there. A man of that caliber took a lot of honorary degrees from universities, multiple lifetime achievement, featured on the cover of Time magazine. He was honored by numerous organizations, the American College of Allergy, American and College of Physicians, the American Pediatric Society, American Society of Blood and Marrow Transplantation, Arthritis Foundation, New York Academy of Science, and many more. At the University of Minnesota, he was given the highest rank as a Regent Professor. University of South Florida as Distinguished Research Professor. He got the award, Laser DeBakey Award for Clinical Medical Research, Gardner Foundation of International Award, William Cooley Award for Distinguished Research, and Japanese patent decoration of conferring, this is, I'm taking exactly as the name, whatever translated from Japanese, patent of decoration conferring the Order of the Sacred Treasure, Gold and Silver Star, and before his death was offered for establishing an endowed chair in immunology in his name. That Japanese award was very special. One of his trainees from Japan went back to Japan and rose up to the level of university president. This is not a simple undertaking in Japan. So that's the kind of people who can be guided and fruitful. He interacted with many politicians, including the president. He and the president of the MD Anderson were talking to the president about how we fight cancer. And with a bone marrow transplant recipient here, he loved to be a clinician. In the meantime, he took care of his children and fun. He would be good a fisherman, and he took trophies, big ones. And this picture just struck me. What are you about to do, Dr. G? Well, a man got to do what a man's got to do. He didn't expect a giant scientist will be in his farm in Minnesota. And bad weather, you see, there's no leaves, thanks to it's cold, and he is farming land. One time, I was very curious to know his IQ. And he told me, it is not for publication. That's it, and I didn't know what it is. He was a magnet for people whenever he's there. This was in a social event in a house. And people just flock around him, not interested in the rest of things. And he's nicely sitting there. Wherever he went, the people flock around him. He was also a magnet for the press. The press wrote a lot. They would run after him. Some of the newspapers, nutrition without malnutrition reduces morbidity and mortality. A great area. Succeeded in mice show clearly that the mice will live longer if they were just nourished enough, a balanced diet, but not to gain weight, and the cancer incidence in them is much less. Transplant breakthroughs, medical wizard in a space race, getting a lot of grants, transplant breakthrough. That Japanese prize was hailed. This is the one. It's a very good piece of jewels and precious stones there. It's another picture of it. It is Order of the Sacred Treasure of Gold, Silver Star by the Emperor of Japan. This is Bill Young, the congressman, who was honored, both of them, by the Life Achievement Award by the Arthritis Foundation. And this is the man who facilitated initiating the national bone marrow transplant. By the Allergy and Asthma Foundation, Lifetime Achievement Award in Tampa Bay area. And one thing here, this. Through good research, more than 75 otherwise terminal diseases can be treated by bone marrow transplant. Something that started to cure just primary immune deficiencies went into a lot of metabolic diseases and hematologic and neoplastic and expanding. Before my leaving there, 2 celebrations were done for him, knowing that he will retire soon. He was supposed to retire some years ago, but we said, well, before he retires, we made one 94 and one 201. It was attended each by more than 400 former trainees and colleagues from various countries came in their own expense completely. There was both a scientific symposium by the top scientists, as well as some entertainment. One evening we were on the beach, and all of us donned good guys T-shirts on both occasions. And everybody, technicians and researchers and everybody was having that shirt. And some even put a picture of Dr. Good in their faces. And Dr. Good himself has it, of course. And even I was a good guy, but not him, not this guy. The true good guy is this, absolutely, he's a delight. Great man, achiever, serious, and have fun. And we all were Robert Good. He is here. When the newspapers wrote about that, endowed chair was put. All Children's Hospital Foundation donated 1 million, and the university put 750 on it. And established Robert A. Good Chair in Immunology. And this is some of those who attended when you needed to take a group picture. The rest, it was just like going up like a pyramid, but this is about half of the pyramid, and many were not in the picture, and he was in the middle here. The UCF newsletters wrote about him, and some special people were giving a statement. I copied them to be clear to you. Richard Gatti was one of his trainees, and during his fellowship, that when the first bone marrow transplant was done. He's a great professor at UCLA. Dr. Good never resorted to the traditional didactic, authoritarian approach to medical education common in his day. His was a more democratic and energetic approach to teaching that fully engaged students. He expected his students to set and meet high standards, and amazingly, most did. By doing the simple method of teaching in recent years, we are not giving the full potential to our trainees. We are going back. That's another issue. I don't want to enter into it. Tom Fleischer, a friend who also spoke in Grand Rounds, invited him here. He's the chief of laboratory medicine, was one of his trainees. Dr. Good was a legendary physician, teacher, and scientist. He served as an inspiration for countless physicians, of whom I was one. His legacy of commitment to patients and clinical immunology will live on through the many he touched. That is true. Max Cooper, famous immunologist who was a Howard Hughes investigator, is at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. I don't think anyone who came in contact with Dr. Good will ever forget him, which is very, very true. Whenever I meet somebody who might say, I don't forget the first time I saw this man. I don't forget the first time that I heard him, just like happened with me. In 1976, I remember the name of the hotel just for him. I don't remember a hotel that I stayed a month ago. He had a huge amount of energy, intellectual curiosity, and zest of scientific debate, qualities that made him a stimulating teacher and fun to be around. During one of the presentations, the celebrations, Dr. Good, another distinguished man, the Nobel laureate, Donald Thomas, a pioneer in bone marrow transplant. He came to attend the celebration and he spoke. While at the podium and at the head table, Dr. Good and the others, the dean and president of the universities, he pointed to Dr. Good by his hand and said, "This is the man who deserves the Nobel Prize." A nice surprise happened in the celebration. During after a coffee break in the symposium, after everybody sat, it was arranged that the first bone marrow transplant recipient, that man entered suddenly as a surprise. What a feature! I didn't have the camera with me in my pocket to take that picture. How Dr. Good surprised to see that man was in his late 20s at that time, coming suddenly in front of us. David. David came with his older sister, who was the donor of the marrow. It was a memorable thing. I just couldn't find a picture, so I put these. This is how they met. That is David, and one of the celebrations came back. And he was a pharmacist in Connecticut. He has 2 sons, healthy. This picture was just shortly before I moved there. And we were about 10 faculty or more. Not everybody stood in this picture. But we knew that he's an institution, he's deteriorating, and we were leaving. 1 month before his death, I was already here, Shreveport. This is a picture, only 2 physicians in this picture. And the rest are 2 lab researchers, and the rest are secretaries. The empire went down because he was the king of it. He was terminal and was in the hospital for a few days. Then he told his wife, "I want to see my students." First said, "Take me home." He insisted, "I want to go home." In the same evening, he told his wife, "I want to see my students." So she called anybody who was available that evening, and they came around him, and while they were there, he passed away. All the newspapers wrote right away, whether local newspapers or New York Times, write about him. Everywhere, University of South Florida, and other places, Minnesota, over the memorial service was done, and the American Academy of Allergy put an obituary, the American College of Allergy put an obituary, attributed to Rockefeller University, Immune Deficiency Foundation, Jeff Modell Foundation. After his departure, his books, he has a large library, scientific papers, and everything that belonged to his work was given a home at Harvard University. And 2 years after he passed away, a society was formed in his name, and that periodically holds symposia about almost once a year and the giant scientists in immunology will speak to bring each other to the cutting edge of the specialty. So this is one of the brochure. It's called RAG, although RAG is something else in immunology. And this is the painting done to be at the Harvard, next to his archives there. He was called over all the years that he is the father of modern immunology. That was mentioned a lot. He was truly the father. He was a man I shall not look upon his like again. And thank you for listening, and I hope any of you have comments. I don't have answers for questions probably. And thank you again, Jay, for giving me the opportunity for this.
They had many characteristics. Very much so, and all the others.
Unfortunately, the teaching is not given its appropriate value. I resigned from all committees in the institution because of my time, except the promotion committee, to defend the teacher. Absolutely. I do much less research than my earlier days now, and I care about the teaching. That's what I will leave behind, whether I retire or go to the other side of life. But this is the most wonderful thing, teaching. And the institution should appreciate it. Promotion should be considerate of this thing. But the CV doesn't show anything of that. Right? I hope that this of inspiration and of lessons in many ways about this.